Prince William plans to flex his muscles and wipe his wayward brother, Prince Harry, and his power-hungry wife, Meghan, from the history books.
The late Queen's own words now echo like a warning nobody wanted to hear. He keeps the title, he holds on to the dukedom, he stays in the line of succession, but he flat out refuses every single responsibility that makes those things mean something. Queen Elizabeth II saw exactly where that road was heading, the sharp eye of a woman who spent 70 years steering the most watched institution on the planet. She knew what a half-in, half-out deal would look like, and she personally shut it down at Sandringham firm, final, no debate. But ever since she passed, Harry has been quietly rebuilding that exact arrangement she destroyed piece by piece, like he's betting nobody's watching closely enough. And now Prince William is making one thing crystal clear. The answer isn't just no, it's never, it's done. And the proof?
He retains his title, his dukedom, his place in the line of succession. He just doesn't have to follow any of the rules. The late Queen foresaw danger in such an arrangement, which is precisely why she killed it at Sandringham. Harry is now resurrecting it, daring his father to strip the titles. That would make it less sellable.
It's literally being ripped off the walls of a cottage on the Windsor estate right now. No big speech, no public showdown, something far quieter and, because of that, far more final. The decision has been made at the very top. Strip out every single renovation Harry and Meghan made to Frogmore Cottage. The yoga studio gone, the copper bathtub gone, the vegan paint gone, the rewired electrics gone. All of it, funded by roughly £2.4 million in taxpayer money, torn out and removed. The property is being broken back into the staff units it was before the late Queen handed it over as a wedding gift in 2018. Returned brick by brick to the pre-Meghan and Harry era. Think about what that actually means. The institution isn't just managing a messy exit. It's erasing the evidence that the exit ever had a home to leave from. It's not saying this chapter ended badly, it's saying the chapter never should have been written. There's a massive difference between an ending and an erasure, and the palace chose erasure. Because endings invite people to come back, erasures don't. What makes this explosive isn't really about a cottage.
The idea is to bring it back to being two separate staff units. And yes, the symbolism is quite clear, and they're all family more than anybody understands how these things will be seen. So I think there was clearly some intent here. They are quite literally erasing, expunging every trace of the Duke and Duchess of Duplicity from the royal residences, from the royal estates.
It's about who's actually running the show inside that institution right now, and that person is not the man currently wearing the crown. It's the man waiting to wear it next. Prince William has landed in a place of total, unshakable finality on his brother's role in the royal family. No leftover warmth, no hesitation softening the blow. Just a cold, calculated decision about what the monarchy actually needs. And what it needs, William has decided, with the patience of someone who knows time is on his side, is for Harry and Meghan to be cut away, cleanly, permanently. And there's something almost poetic about how it's being done. No statement, no press conference, no grand declaration that opens the door to a back and forth. Just a planning review. Just an administrative process. Just the slow, grinding machinery of an institution that's decided no more talking, only action. To understand how heavy the Frogmore decision really is, you have to remember what it meant when the Queen gave it to them. This wasn't a rental. It wasn't a temporary stopgap. It was a gift from the reigning monarch in the year of their marriage of a property sitting inside the private Windsor estate, one of the most exclusive, most secure, most symbolically loaded addresses in the entire United Kingdom. That gift said, in the clearest language the palace knows how to speak, you belong here, this is yours. You are part of this family. What Harry and Meghan did with that statement is now fully on the record. They accepted it, then immediately commissioned one of the most eyebrow-raising renovations in recent royal history.
And of course, it also highlights the duplicity of the Sussexes, as I said, that they are posing as champions of sustainability. And here they spent £2.4 million, originally of taxpayer money, in order to put in these yoga studios, to put in all these copper baths and so forth. So much for living within your means.
£2.4 million on a yoga studio, a £5,000 copper bathtub, ceiling beams, new electrics, new plumbing, and vegan paint that somehow became the single most perfectly ridiculous symbol of the whole situation. And then, barely a season after the paint dried, they left. Canada first, then California. Harry eventually paid back the renovation costs, but only after serious press pressure, 6 months after they were already gone. Then, in March 2023, King Charles formally removed them from the property just weeks after Harry published Spare, a book that handed over private conversations, family grievances, and decades of personal wounds all packaged up for commercial sale. Since the eviction, Frogmore has sat completely empty for 3 years, a listed property on the Windsor estate untouched, frozen in time. Now the institution has decided what to do with it, and the decision isn't to repurpose it or quietly adapt it, it's to undo it, erase it, put it back exactly the way it was before Harry and Meghan ever entered the royal family's story. And here's the detail that makes everything unmistakably clear. Even Prince Andrew, currently tangled in his own drawn-out housing negotiations, looked at Frogmore Cottage and walked away. Let that sink in for a moment. Andrew is not exactly riding high in public opinion. His roles have been stripped. His ability to represent the institution has been effectively gone for years.
King Charles is turning a blind eye, but King William won't.
Harry and Meghan should be shaking in their boots right now if they are not already. And they could have had the best of all worlds if they had played their cards right. But this was a route Harry and Meghan decided to go down where they trashed their family, and this is the result.
And yet even he decided Frogmore carried a weight he didn't want anywhere near him. That's how completely the Sussex name has poisoned that address. The institution would rather spend serious money tearing out £2.4 million worth of work than leave a single corner of the Windsor estate marked by their presence. There's a fault line running straight through the royal family's approach to Harry and Meghan, and it's been visible for years. On one side, King Charles. On the other, Prince William. Not a split between love and coldness, both men carry genuinely complicated feelings, but a split over institutional conviction, over who is actually willing to do what needs to be done. The Frogmore decision is the clearest sign yet that the line has been crossed entirely on William's terms. Charles, by multiple accounts, has never fully released the father's instinct. The hope, however faint, however politically inconvenient, that some kind of real connection might one day be rebuilt. He's spoken publicly about forgiveness. He's reportedly stayed slightly open, even through the worst of it, to the idea that something could be salvaged. That instinct is real. It hasn't served him well, and it has been steadily overridden by the institutional realities William has pushed, with zero ambiguity. William, by contrast, has reportedly been absolute. He has told those close to him that stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles is a matter of when, not if. He is said to be deeply against the Home Office security review, not as a safety issue, but as a strategic one, because William understands exactly what restored publicly funded security would mean in practice. Harry visits Britain. Visits mean photographs near the royal family. Photographs mean commercial relevance. And commercial relevance is precisely what William is working to make impossible. And that brings us to the security question, the pressure point around which everything else rotates. Harry has pushed his Home Office review with real persistence. His stated reason is safety, that without state protection,
Their salience, their relevance to the public, their ability to attract money is all relevant, is all related to their proximity to the crown. And the more distant they become from the royal family, the more their star, if it ever was a star, tumbles and gets tarnished. And now it's basically little more than a damp squib.
he can't safely bring his family to visit. But if he wins that review, the practical result is the restoration of the exact infrastructure that makes any attempted return commercially viable. William has decided that cannot happen. The Frogmore demolition is his architectural answer. Remove the base, remove the home, remove the entire logic of the return. The centre of gravity inside the monarchy has shifted. Charles's health has sped up a process that was always coming. William is Prince of Wales in title, but in practice, he is already the driving force behind the monarchy's direction. The deep freeze around any Sussex return is total. The Frogmore demolition isn't Charles's decision dressed up as administration. It is William's will made concrete, quite literally. Strip away the emotional framing, the talk of children visiting grandparents, of a man wanting to come home, and what's actually underneath the Sussex push to return to Britain is a financial calculation. A straightforward, increasingly transparent, increasingly desperate financial calculation. Because the Sussex brand, that expensively maintained identity built entirely on one man's royal bloodline, has a structural problem no lifestyle content can paper over. It has no independent foundation. Take away Harry's connection to the British crown, and what you're left with is a man and a woman in California whose business ventures have consistently fallen short of their ambitions, whose public appearances draw ever-shrinking crowds, and whose cultural moment, if it ever truly existed, has visibly passed. Look at the evidence. The Spotify deal ended with a senior industry figure publicly calling them grifters.
What I believe is going on, Rafe, is that this is just a financial play anyway, because these two are dead broke. Now, that's not to say they don't have some money in the bank, Rafe. Of course they do, but the money in the bank is like the inheritance from Princess Diana and the Queen Mother. They're spending all of the money that they're earning on this astronomical security bill, this astronomical mortgage on the property in Montecito. And I think they want to come back, use the proximity to the British royal family in order to get more financial deals. And I think William sees through it.
The Netflix content landed with critical and commercial indifference. The lifestyle brand, the candles, the women's retreat in Colombia with barely anyone in the seats. And then there's Geneva, a moment that demands its own spotlight. Meghan travelled to one of the world's most cosmopolitan cities to speak at an international conference on children's internet safety. The crowd that showed up, according to multiple eyewitness accounts, was approximately 10 people. 10 people in a major global city. For a woman who was once, briefly, one of the most talked about people on the planet. If one single moment captures exactly where the Sussex trajectory has landed, Geneva is it. And so the logic of the return becomes impossible to ignore. Restore the security arrangements, restore the ability to visit, restore the ability to visit, restore proximity to the royal family. Restore that proximity. Restore at least partially the commercial leverage that has been bleeding out. It's not complicated. It's so obvious that the obviousness itself is part of what infuriates William. He watched this exact strategy being rehearsed against his father for years. He is not about to let it run again. There's another layer to the financial picture that deserves a hard look: the matchsticks. Reports have surfaced that among Meghan's current business directions is a venture involving matchsticks. Sit with that for a second. The woman who once stood in a Givenchy gown on the steps of Windsor Castle, who launched a lifestyle brand with enormous fanfare, who positioned herself as the American answer to effortless, quiet luxury, is now apparently trying to build a business around matchsticks. The distance between that opening and this present moment is one of the more complete commercial collapses in recent public life. The late Queen said, "You cannot be half in."
Harry's been brainwashed by Meghan. Who could disagree? Since they got married, he suddenly hates his country, hates his family, hates being a royal, and goes off for a very boring life in California. This is not a marriage. This is a hostage situation.
Half out. Harry treated it like a starting position in a negotiation. William does not make that mistake. The Sandringham Agreement exists. Its terms were set personally by the late Queen. Harry has been quietly trying to dismantle those terms since the day she passed. The demolition of Frogmore is William's response, delivered not in words, but in rubble. There's a question serious observers keep coming back to, and it deserves a direct answer. How did it come to this? How did the second son of the King of England, a man who walked behind his mother's coffin, who served on the front line, who seemed to represent a genuinely grounded kind of royalty, end up here? Watching his former home get torn apart from a house in California, his business ventures producing less and less, his family relationships in near total collapse? The answer, according to those closest to the situation, begins and ends with the woman he married and the very specific way that someone of enormous, relentless ambition can quietly reroute the life of someone who is, by nature, far more follower than leader. What Meghan brought to the marriage was a sharp, strategic mind that has consistently moved faster than her actual wisdom, and an appetite for reinvention that has consistently outpaced her real capabilities. Smart enough to burn every bridge she's crossed her father, her half-siblings, former friends, the royal family, but not quite smart enough to build anything that lasts on the other side. The pattern of her life, viewed with the distance time now gives us, tells a consistent story, always winning in the short term, always leaving damage in the longer term, and never quite understanding why the world keeps refusing to behave as expected. Those close to the story now say, with increasing openness, that Harry appears to be becoming the next name on that list. But here's what makes this story genuinely heartbreaking rather than just dramatic. It's not really about Harry and Meghan. It's about two young children who had absolutely no say in any of the decisions that built the world they were born into. Their grandfather is a king. Their grandmother, in the memory of...
You can't trust Meghan and Harry. That's the point. Even if you think you've got a deal, the palace will be shocked that they will renege immediately because they have no advantage of reconciliation. They've got no advantage of ending their vendetta.
Everyone who loved her was Princess Diana. Their uncle will one day wear the crown. And those children will grow up understanding the way children always eventually do exactly what was given up in their name. The demolition of Frogmore also removes the last piece of Harry's argument, the one he's been quietly making through lawyers and intermediaries, that he is being treated unfairly, that the institution is being needlessly harsh, that a man simply wants to visit his homeland safely. That argument always carried a certain emotional pull, but it needs a home to land at. It needs a base that suggests some real, ongoing connection to the place being visited. Without Frogmore, that argument has nowhere left to stand. The institution hasn't just closed the door, it has removed the doorstep. The contrast with Catherine is impossible to look away from. The Princess of Wales has navigated the hardest stretch of her life, her illness, her treatment, her careful return to public duties with a dignity that has only deepened public love for her. William, watching his wife's conduct and his brother's choices at the same time, has the clearest possible side-by-side view of what service looks like and what walking away from it produces. That contrast isn't just a footnote to this story, it is its emotional backbone. Now, let's be exact about what never return actually means. There is a version of the future where Harry does set foot in Britain, a significant family occasion, a solemn moment, logistics quietly handled, photographs taken, a brief and carefully managed proximity to the institution observed, contained, and concluded. But here is the thought that keeps coming back after sitting with this story. When Harry's eldest son is old enough, maybe 15 or 16 old enough to understand the full shape of what actually happened, and he looks back at Frogmore Cottage, at what it was, what was done to it, and why, what will he feel? Not what his parents guided him to feel, not the carefully constructed narrative that surrounded him his entire childhood. What he will feel privately in that honest part of himself that no amount of California sunshine can permanently reach. Because here is the reality he will one day have to reconcile. He was born into one of the most remarkable families in human history. Not remarkable because of wealth, though the wealth is real. Not remarkable because of fame, though the fame is global and total. Remarkable because of what the institution actually represents. Centuries of continuity, of survival, of a family that is bent but never broken through wars, abdications, scandals, and the relentless grinding pressure of public life across generations.
And I think you can see quite clearly on the part of the Duke of Sussex an attempt to try to open up an avenue to return to the fold. As I like to say, he really only knows how to be a prince, a soldier, and a polo player, none of which are very useful when you live in California. And that's why you're seeing increasingly these attempts to try to ape the royals and go on these trips to Australia and elsewhere, basically try to remind the royal family of how good a prince he can be when he tries.
He was born with a grandfather who is a king. a great-grandmother who is arguably the most recognized human being who ever lived, an uncle who will one day carry the weight of the crown, cousins being raised right now with the specific and deliberate preparation for a life of service. And he will grow up in Montecito in a world of green smoothies and wellness retreats and podcast appearances, slowly piecing together the shape of what existed before he was old enough to remember any of it. That piecing together will not be comfortable. Children are remarkably perceptive. They absorb not just what they are told, but what is left unsaid, the hesitations, the careful phrasings, the topics that get quietly redirected at the dinner table. He will notice at some point that his relationship with his grandfather doesn't look like what his friends have with theirs. He will notice that visits to Britain are rare, complicated, logistically loaded in ways that other family visits simply are not. He will notice that his father's name produces a particular reaction in certain rooms, a tension, a guardedness, a careful neutrality that children learn to read long before they can explain what they are reading. And he will eventually, inevitably, go looking for answers. The internet will provide them in abundance. Every interview, every book excerpt, every leaked letter, every dramatic television moment, all of it preserved, searchable, available to a teenager with a phone and a question that will not leave him alone. He will read his father's own words about his own family. He will watch his mother's appearances, the tears, the accusations, the carefully constructed vulnerability deployed for maximum audience impact. He will see the receipts, as his generation would say, and he will have to decide what to do with them. That is an enormous thing to place on a young person, and it is worth being precise about who placed it there, because it was not the institution. The institution did not write a book. The institution did not sit for a documentary series. The institution did not give interviews describing private conversations, private grief, private family dynamics to a global audience for commercial gain. The institution simply responded, in its characteristically patient and architectural way, to choices that were made freely and repeatedly by the adults in those children's lives. But children do not experience institutional logic. They experience absence. They experience distance. They experience the particular loneliness of belonging technically and by bloodline to a world they have never been permitted to fully inhabit. Harry's eldest son carries a name that connects him to something ancient and enormous, and he is growing up thousands of miles from it, in a culture that has no real framework for understanding what that name means or what it once represented. Consider what his younger sister faces alongside him. Named, in what was presented as a tender tribute, after the great-grandmother she never truly knew. A great-grandmother who was, by every account of those who actually knew her, a woman of extraordinary personal discipline, institutional devotion, and quiet steel. A woman who spent her entire adult life placing public duty above personal preference with a consistency the modern world struggles to fully comprehend. She will grow up carrying that name. She will eventually learn enough about the woman behind it to understand the weight of what she was given, and she will grow up in a household that made choices that woman specifically and personally opposed. That is not a small thing to carry. That is the kind of contradiction that takes years, sometimes a lifetime, to fully process. And it will be processed because these things always are in the private interior life of someone who had no say in any of it. The Sussex strategy, such as it is, has always rested on a particular bet. The bet is that proximity to the royal family, even contested, even hostile proximity, even the proximity of conflict and grievance and public accusation, retains commercial and cultural value. That being adjacent to the institution, even in opposition to it, keeps the lights on in Montecito, that the world will remain interested in the drama indefinitely. But that bet is losing. It has been losing for some time. The audiences are shrinking, the deals are underperforming. The cultural moment that briefly made the Sussex story feel urgent and important has moved on the way cultural moments always do toward the next thing, the next drama, the next figure willing to trade privacy for platform. What remains when the moment passes is the actual substance of what was built. And the honest answer, surveying the wreckage of Spotify deals and Netflix viewing figures and Geneva attendance numbers, is that the substance is thin. And this is where the children's future becomes genuinely complicated in ways that go far beyond family drama. Because the bet their parents made was not just a commercial one, it was an identity bet. A wager that a life built on the proceeds of royal proximity, on the sustained monetization of grievance against an institution, on the permanent performance of victimhood from the platform that victimhood provided, was a sustainable foundation for a family. It is not. It was never going to be. And as Harry's son gets older, as his own identity begins to solidify, as he starts asking the questions that young people inevitably ask about who they are and where they come from and what they belong to, he is going to bump up against the walls of that bet in ways his parents perhaps did not fully anticipate when they were busy burning bridges and signing streaming deals. There is also the question of what reconciliation even looks like from this point forward, because while the story is often framed as Harry versus the institution, the more honest framing is Harry versus William. And that relationship, brother to brother, future king to the man who walked beside him at their mother's farewell, who stood beside him at their father's coronation, carries a grief underneath the institutional conflict that neither man has publicly acknowledged. But anyone watching carefully can see it. Brothers do not become strangers easily. The process is slow, accumulated, built from 1,000 small decisions that each seem manageable in isolation, but collectively produce an unbridgeable distance. William and Harry have reached that distance, and what's almost unbearable about it is that nobody who watched them walk side by side behind their mother's coffin, two boys, alone in their grief in front of the entire world, could have imagined it ending here. In rubble, in silence, in the cold, administrative language of planning, permissions and structural removals. The Frogmore demolition is not just an administrative decision. It is the physical expression of a relationship that has been torn down just as thoroughly, just as deliberately, and with just as little prospect of restoration as the yoga studio and the copper bathtub and the vegan paint being stripped from those walls right now. When an institution speaks in brick and mortar rather than words, it is because words have run out, and the words between these two brothers ran out a long time ago. What would it actually take to rebuild it? The honest answer is more than either man currently appears willing to give, and more than the people around them are likely to encourage. It would require Harry to publicly and genuinely acknowledge the damage caused, not the carefully hedged, PR-managed, partial acknowledgements that have occasionally surfaced in interviews designed to soften the edges of a story that has no soft edges, but a real, unscripted reckoning with what the books and the documentaries and the interviews actually did to real people, people who had no publicist, no Netflix deal, no platform from which to respond, who had no choice but to absorb the impact publicly and move on in silence. It would require Meghan to accept that her role in this fracture is not incidental but central. That the strategy of leveraging grievance, of converting private pain into public content, of building a brand on the sustained performance of victimhood was a choice with consequences that extended far beyond Montecito, a conclusion she has shown absolutely no sign of approaching, and one that her entire current business direction suggests she remains committed to avoiding. And it would require William, the most institutionally hardened of the three, the one whose resolve has only calcified with every new headline, every new interview, every new commercial project built on the foundation of his family's private life, to find, somewhere beneath the cold, strategic clarity, the brother he grew up with. The boy who used to make him laugh, the boy who walked beside him on the worst day of both their lives and understood, without words, exactly what that moment cost. None of that appears imminent. None of it, given the current trajectories, appears likely within any time frame that is easy to imagine. The gap is too wide, the decisions too public, the commercial machinery too deeply invested in keeping the grievance alive, for any quiet, private repair to take hold. And so the story continues toward its logical conclusion, not a dramatic confrontation, not a tearful reconciliation televised for maximum impact, but the quiet, grinding finalization of a separation that has been underway for years and is now simply being made permanent in the most literal way available. The rubble of Frogmore Cottage is the punctuation mark at the end of a very long and very painful sentence. It does not tell us everything about how that sentence was written, or who bears the greatest share of responsibility for the words that ended up in it. Reasonable people can and do disagree about that. But it tells us, with the absolute clarity that only physical reality can provide, that the sentence is finished. The institution has moved on. William has moved on. And the space that once existed for a different outcome has been demolished along with the copper bathtub. And yet the story does not end with William's certainty or the institution's architectural resolve or even the financial unraveling of a brand built on borrowed credibility. It ends somewhere else entirely. It ends in California, in a house in Montecito, with 2 children who will grow up and eventually demand the truth. They will carry, in their names and their bloodlines and the vast gap between what they were born into and what they were raised in, the full weight of choices made by adults who loved them but perhaps did not think carefully enough about what love, in its most serious and demanding form, actually requires. Love, at its most serious, sometimes means choosing the harder thing. Staying when leaving is easier. Being accountable when accountability is costly. Protecting people who cannot protect themselves from decisions being made in their name. That is what stays with me. Not the politics. Not the institutional maneuvering. Not even the almost darkly comic spectacle of a £2.4 million royal renovation being systematically reduced to its original staff quarters. It is the image of a young person, maybe 15, maybe 16, sitting quietly somewhere with the full truth of his own story laid out in front of him. Every interview, every book excerpt, every leaked detail, every dramatic television moment, all of it searchable, all of it permanent, all of it waiting for the moment he is old enough to understand what he is actually reading. And in that moment, he will have to decide something that nobody can decide for him. Not his parents, not the institution, not the armies of publicists and lawyers and intermediaries who have spent years managing a narrative that was never really about him, even though it was always, at its core, entirely about what kind of future he and his sister would inherit. He will have to decide what kind of man he wants to be, whether the story he was handed is the story he intends to live. Whether the choices made before he was old enough to have a voice are choices he is willing to carry forward or choices he is willing to set down quietly and begin again from. That decision will be his. The first genuinely free choice in a life that began with every other choice already made for him by people who were too busy making history to fully consider what it would feel like to grow up inside it. And in that, if nowhere else in this entire extraordinary, painful, and occasionally almost unbelievable saga, there is something that feels, against all the odds, like hope. If this gave you something real to think about, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content. Not subscribed yet? Now is the time. Hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. Share this with someone who would find it worthwhile, and drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think Harry's son will feel when he's finally old enough to understand the full picture? See you in the next one.